Okay, today is October 28th, 2009, and I am interviewing Mr. Edward Koenig. Were you drafted or did you enlist in the service?
Neither. I went to the University of Illinois where they have required ROTC for 2 years, and you can elect to take 2 more years, your advanced ROTC, which that earns a commission for you. When you graduate, you can also have, if you went through all 4 years of ROTC, you qualified to get a second lieutenant's commission.
Did you pick the service branch you went into?
Sort of. I had some choices. For whatever reason, I chose coast artillery and anti-aircraft artillery.
For no particular reason?
No particular reason.
Sounded good?
Yeah, I could have been in some other branch, but and I'll get to this in a minute, but at the end of my 4 years, the war was already on. And they were training flying personnel so quickly and expanding the Air Force so quickly, they needed administrative officers. So they came to the business school. And for those of us who were graduating with a business degree and getting a second lieutenant's commission, they offered us the opportunity to change branch of service and go into the Air Corps. It was known as the Air Corps at that time. So that's how I happened to get into the Air Corps, Air Force, rather than in artillery.
What did you train to become in the Air Force? A pilot or?
No, they wanted us to be administrative officers. That's why they came to the business school. They were getting plenty of pilots, and they were growing very fast. The air crews were growing very fast, but they had to have people on the ground echelon and people who could do the necessary things for housing and records and that sort of thing. So yes, I was offered the opportunity to learn to be an adjutant.
Where did you do your training? Was it in Chicago or?
No, actually, the business school, of course, was at Illinois.
Right.
And then between your junior and senior year, when you're taking the advanced program, you go to some camp, and we went to Fort Dearborn. And were housed in tents there. And then we had training, training with carbines and pistols and actually anti-aircraft guns, which you sat in a pivoting gun emplacement, and you were shooting 3-inch 90mm shells up at a tow plane. And I often thought about how brave that pilot was that was pulling the target that we were shooting at. And so that was that kind of training. But after a couple of months, when I was actually assigned to a squadron, I was asked to go to the Adjutant General School in Fort Washington, Maryland, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. The Adjutant General School is where it's an administrative course in how to do the things that an adjutant does.
What was the highest rank you received by the end of your service?
By the end of my service, I was a lieutenant colonel.
And you're originally from Chicago?
Yes, I was born in Chicago.
What neighborhood did you grow up in?
I grew up in Edgebrook, which is not too far down the road here. You go down Waukegan Road to Caldwell Avenue, and pretty soon you come to Edgebrook. That's because my grandfather, Koenig, had a farm there before it was subdivided and built. And so after it was subdivided, my father bought a lot, Caldwell Avenue. And I lived there for the 10 years that finished school, grade school, and Shores High School.
All right, did you want to do your...
Yeah, I already told you how I happened to get my commission.
Right.
At University of Illinois. Then Pearl Harbor occurred in December 1941, December 7th, and I was still in school, and so we very well knew that we were going down to active duty as soon as we got our commission. And
do you remember what it was like that day?
Yeah, we had about 20 or 30 guys standing around the radio listening to the report. It was pretty exciting, and I was in a fraternity house, and a number of them had already gone into the service either by enlisting or being drafted, and I was one of them. Fortunately, I was able to finish that last semester because I was going to be commissioned through the ROTC program. That was a big benefit. That
Right.
I didn't have my education interrupted and have to go back after the war was over. So that worked out very well. So that was in December, and so we. So actually, at the end of the semester, of course, I was assigned to a base. And my first base was in Meridian, Mississippi, where they were flying B-25s, not B-26s. B-20, I don't know, some of you remember that General Doolittle flew a flight of B-25s off of an aircraft carrier early in the war and flew over Tokyo to let the Japanese know we were there. I mean, the Pearl Harbor, of course, as you know, I'm sure you know, was a very dastardly thing to have happen, and many of our people were lost at Pearl Harbor. And so that's when President Roosevelt declared war. Up to that time, we had kind of kept out of the war, thinking we could keep out of the war. But anyway, that was Pearl Harbor, and so we went immediately into the service after we graduated. I went to a little base in Meridian, Mississippi, Key Field, and then very shortly, maybe a month or so, I went to Tampa to the MacDill Field, and we moved into B-26s instead of B-25s.
What was the main difference between the two planes?
Well, they were both two-engine airplanes. The B-26 was a heavier airplane, heavier armament, carried a bigger bomb load. So they stopped building the B-25 then. So when I moved to Tampa, they made me a squadron adjutant. A bomb group consists of 4 squadrons, as we showed you that, 4 squadrons, and I was a squadron adjutant. And that every squadron had 16 airplanes, and the air crews that went with that, so there were the squadron had maybe 120 airmen, pilots, co-pilots, bombardiers, navigators, flight engineers, radio operators, and a couple of gunners. So that was the flight crew, maybe 7 people on each airplane. And so every squadron had those flying personnel, plus then you had aircraft mechanics and radio operators and clerks and cooks and all the rest of the support staff. So I was shortly after being assigned to a squadron, I had the opportunity to go to the Adjutant General School, which I mentioned, which was in Fort Washington, Maryland, which was good for me.
Is that like an honor to be allowed
Well,
to do that?
it's, yeah, in a way, it's a selective thing. And so when I came back, I was assigned from the squadron to the bomb group headquarters, which is, I guess, I'm a very young second lieutenant here, sitting at my desk at MacDill Field as the bomb group adjutant. So that was a good move. So that we trained, the group trained there of course, for combat. I made a lot of flights out over the bay, over Tampa, and for a month or so we were there, and then we went to Myrtle Beach bombing range. Today Myrtle Beach is known for its golf tournaments. Well, there was no such thing going, no people staying at resorts at that time, but it permitted our flyers to do low-level flying over the ocean. And so they trained there for several months at Myrtle Beach bombing range. When I got my appointment to be bomb group adjutant, this is the man that I worked for, Colonel Williams, And the CEO of the bomb group did lead the combat flights in when they actually were bombing. He led the 60 airplanes or so, and all the squadrons would follow Colonel Williams.
The important guy.
Very important guy. And this man was his superior, General Anderson of the wing. As I mentioned before, we were visited by the bomb group commander, and this is Hap Arnold, General Hap Arnold, who became the Secretary of Air Force at the Pentagon after the war was over. So these are pictures I'm pleased to have.
Yeah.
So after the assignment then to Myrtle Beach bombing range, we were there shortly, and well, you were talking about an adjutant. You probably don't know what an adjutant is, but it's strictly an administrative post. Colonel Williams had a strategic officer under his wing, under his command, to help him, of course, a big job. But on the other side, there was all the administrative duties. And so an adjutant, it's an office position, and you have an in-back out basket and a whole basket. You're responsible for all the classified documents that come in, that they're held under lock and key. Then all the people, officers and enlisted men, have service records for the time that they served, and what they're entitled to in the way of benefits and their promotions. So all the pay records and furloughs, and then in addition, you're responsible to see about living quarters for all of them. Where are they, and are they kept in good condition, and then all the food and the cooks. So it's anything that is non-flying. It's administrative, yeah. So that's what an adjutant basically did. So after this, I mentioned you, after I finished the adjutant general school, I was assigned back to MacDill Field and became the group adjutant. Whenever we moved from one place to another, the air crews, of course, would go in the airplanes, and I had the questionable duty of taking all the ground echelon by train, and so that was usually a busy time. So we went from Myrtle Beach bombing range, to Fort Knox, which most people think of course, as a artillery, ground echelon, ground forces, tanks, mobile guns, and all. But it had an airfield called Godman Field, adjacent to Fort Knox, or part of Fort Knox, and we moved there as preparatory to going overseas. So we were there for a short time, and it was my good fortune to be assigned. It was very hard to find a place to live because you'd have 700 people coming at one time trying to find a place to live. Well, no, that's not true. I'm talking about officers. The officers would like to live off the base, and so they were trying to find places to live in Elizabethtown, which is where Fort Knox was. And so I was fortunate that I was assigned this little house.
Did you live with other people then? Or?
No, that was our. I failed to say that after I graduated, I went to MacDill Field, and I was at MacDill Field for a short time, and it looked like we were going to be in the country for 6 or 8 months. And so I called back home to Norma and said, "What would you think about our getting married?" We had talked previously, well, we'll wait 5 years till the war is over. Well, 5 years became 2 months. And so we were married, and fortunately then, she went to Myrtle Beach bombing range with me, and she went to to Fort Knox with me. And then while we were at Fort Knox, this little baby was born, our son Tom. So we were there in this little house, and when it came time for us to leave, of course, they left me there and went on home. So that was a little hard. But when we were given our orders to go overseas, the airplanes, of course, all flew, the air crews flew the airplanes over to, we were going to England. But they took the pilots, co-pilots, navigator, flight engineers, but not the bombardiers, and not the gunners. So we had some pretty unhappy fellows who had to go by train and by sea, and they were assigned to me. I had the job of taking the ground echelon over to England. And to make matters a little more sticky, we left on New Year's Eve. Oh. So there might not have been quite as much celebrating. Yeah. But every single one was there. I didn't have a problem with that. So we went then by train to the port of embarkation, debarkation, and our troop ship was actually a converted luxury liner, the Ile-de-France, and it was fast enough that we didn't have to have a convoy or escort. We could outrun any submarines. So we went on this Ile-de-France, and it was a pretty rough crossing because it was January, and North Atlantic was pretty rough at that time of the year. So but that's what we did. We were assigned to a base in England, in Essex County. We took over a base that had been occupied by the British Air Force in a little town called Matching Green. And I don't think it had changed in 100 years. It had thatched roofs and a pub and this and that. And they had no place for us they didn't have housing. So we stayed in Quonset huts. Those were, as you can see,
very nice.
nothing very fancy, iron beds and horse blankets, and it was heated with a coke burning stove in the middle of the room. But we had these to live in, and then they had much bigger Quonset huts for airplane repairs and the mess halls and places like that. I have this picture, which looks like we were having an air raid. Well, actually the air raids had subsided somewhat by this time, because the Luftwaffe had pretty much run its course, and of course the Americans and the British together were able to handle those. But they had been bombing London for a long time.
You weren't there during that time?
No. By the time we got there, the tide had turned so far as the Air Force was concerned. But then they sent over what we called buzz bombs, which was an early version of rockets. And these unmanned, tiny aircraft, when they were coming over, they sounded like motorcycles. And so long as you could hear the motors, you didn't have to worry. It's when you didn't hear them anymore, because you didn't know where they were going to drop. When they stopped, when the motors stopped running, then they just dropped wherever they were. Of course, they aimed them mainly at London, and we were maybe 25 miles out of London. But when you heard them, we jump into these slip trenches like this, and fortunately, none ever dropped on us or so close to us that we were injured by shrapnel. That I say, the group that lived in these quarters. But we were there about 8 months in these matching green, and then we were assigned to go to France. The town nearest was Rouen-Ami, where the guys called it Royami. Rouen-Ami was maybe 40 miles north and the east of Paris, and the Germans had moved out of a chateau, and so our headquarters, our administrative headquarters, moved into this chateau, which was called Tilloy. It's spelled like Tilloy. But when you saw the gateway and you drove up this long driveway to this lovely chateau, and it had its own chapel next to it, and so we, that is those of us in the headquarters, our living quarters were on the top floor where the domestic help used to live when it was active. And the countess who owned the chateau and the park all around it, the park, there was a forest, was living in one wing with her daughter and grandson. And they had been there all the time. The Germans lived there, and the Germans left, and we moved into the same quarters.
But they had willingly allowed you to stay there? They were...
The Germans?
No, the...
Oh yeah, they were happy to have us. Obviously, they were happy to get the Germans out of there. The French welcomed the Americans with open arms. This picture I think I showed you was when I was a brand new, fresh second lieutenant and very young. I gained a little age and a little weight here. I think this was either major or lieutenant colonel cap. The squadron personnel then didn't stay in the chateau. They stayed in houses in the town around there. And we were in that about 6 months, and then we were moved to Belgium, to Ash, Belgium. And that's about the time that the Battle of the Bulge was going on, and they overcame the Germans finally. And we had a parade when the end of the war came, and the German armistice was called, and I did show you a picture here where we had this parade, and I was awarded a medal. It's here somewhere. I was standing here, and never mind. You saw it, and I think you took a picture of it. And I think that was at that time I was either awarded the Bronze Star, or this is the medal for the European theater. The first medal here, the blue one, is the American medal, and that is the United States and surrounding islands. The next one was the European theater, and as you can see, they have what they call battle stars, and they name different battles with different names, and so our bomb group was a participant in those, so we have a ribbon there with 4 battle stars on it. And the next piece was the Bronze Star, then the Croix de Guerre, and then the final one was the Victory Medal when the war was over. The 2 blue bars are what they call presidential citations. Our bomb group was recognized in that way. It was very nice. They did a great job. When the Germans surrendered and that war was over, we were all moved to Reims, where you perhaps heard of the Reims Cathedral. That's a landmark, and we had tents we were tense awaiting redeployment to the Pacific, because the war was still going on in the Pacific. So all of the 391st and many others moved to Reims, and then the atom bomb was dropped, and that terminated the war. So we never did go to the Pacific. We were sent home. And here's the picture I was looking at. I think he took that picture earlier. That was at the still in France. So.
So you were deployed then back to the U.S. after?
Back to the United States, and yes.
Do you remember what that day was like when you found out you were finally going home?
Oh, we're very happy.
Yeah.
Of course, and it's been a number of things. The sequence of your return had to do with how long you served and what you did and things like that. And so I had enough points. And when I went back, I didn't have the command of 1,000 troops to take back. We came back not on the Ile-de-France. We came back on a victory ship on the southern route, which is very rocky.
Worse than the way there? Worse than on the way overseas?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the Ile-de-France was a huge liner, and so it would go with it could handle rough weather. But a victory ship is a lot smaller. I remember China dropping off of the countertops. It was pretty rocky, but we were happy to be going. And I went to Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, and was then back home here. And so Norma was home when I returned. I don't know whether my parents or who brought me to the house. She was living with her parents and grandparents while I was gone. And this picture, which I showed you before, shows our Tommy sitting looking at my picture. So Tommy got to know me and uniform and what I looked like. And so when I arrived home and opened the door, Norma was living with him on the second floor of this two-flat. And he was at the top of the stairs and I was at the bottom. And he stood up there and said, "Hello, Daddy."
How old was he at that time?
2.
Oh.
Yeah. I missed him from 2 months to 2 years. I was gone. So there's another little thing, not so little thing I'd like to tell you about. Where is that other?
Box.
Is that here? Norma wrote to me every single day.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I was in a position where I could answer her just about every single day. And so when I was going through my footlocker, now this was about, I think on our 65th wedding anniversary, about that time, I was going through my footlocker. You know what a footlocker is, don't you?
You keep it stuff.
Yeah, it's a big case issued to officers. And so I found all of our letters. So they were a little fragile,
Yeah.
but we had them all there, and I put them in sequence and took them to a bindery, had them copied, and if you can think about, now this was 360 days a year in a couple of years, so there were about almost 700 letters from her to me, and another 700 from me to her. And so that made about 1,400 letters. So if you can think about 8 of these volumes.
There's 8?
Each with our handwritten letters to each other. These are copies of them, of course.
Yeah.
And so we presented them to each other at our wedding anniversary and showed them to our guests.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Did you, so you were able to, at least you were able to keep in touch with your family then while you were overseas by letter?
mail, yeah. No such thing as telephones.
Right.
And they didn't have any radar or anything like that.
What was the food like when you were overseas or in training?
The what like?
The food?
Well, it wasn't so bad when we were in the chateau. They had a decent kitchen. When we were over here in England, our group took over the quarters that had been occupied by the British. And, we had a lot of respect for the British. And I would show you pictures here of some people I befriended who had a boy about the same age as our Tommy. But the mess hall, the cooks in the Air Force, in the British Air Force, apparently liked Brussels sprouts and lamb. Lamb, when it gets a little older, is mutton. Mutton has a strong flavor. A strong flavor and a strong odor. And so when our cooks were moving into that big hangar, which was the mess hall, they said, "Can't we put airplanes here and we'll take over a hangar for the airplanes? We'd rather smell the gasoline and oil." So, but our cooks made American food, and a lot of it was, canned and prepared, and you didn't really expect a lot. It was tolerable. The one thing, I didn't drink coffee. My father was a milkman, so I was raised on milk. But if you drank coffee and you looked in the pot, there usually was kind of a greenish film on top of it, which made it somewhat less attractive. So much for the food. We had enough of it. We didn't go hungry.
That's good. Did you have downtime ever? Like downtime where you didn't have to work necessarily and you were able to, what would you guys do to entertain yourselves?
We could take some time off, not like a week. Well, I shouldn't say that. Actually, this was near the end. I was able to take a week, and a lot of our fellows were going down to the French Riviera and enjoying the beach and the scenery. And there, I had befriended these people in England that had, their name was, they were twin sisters, the Taylor and Vanell were their married names, and they lived with their father in a town near Matching Green called Chelmsford. And they had a little boy who was about the age of my town. And so it gave me a chance to see a little boy growing up. So I would see them on a weekend, maybe go in for church on Sunday. And so when I was given leave over here, when we were at Reims, we were given some time off, I decided instead of going to the Riviera that I would go back to England and visit the folks here. And so I had a short visit with them. So that's the only time off that you can say any leave. Oh, I think that once while we were in England, I went into London, although you had to be very careful because there was a concern of being bombed again, and it was a blackout all the time. London at night was black. So I went in there, and I went to Paris with several of my fellow officers, maybe once or twice, I don't recall. Not like frequently.
Right.
And when I was at the Adjutant General School, I was able to go into Washington, D.C. and see some of the things there.
When you got back to the States, you went and saw your wife and your family, but then how did you go about, like, getting your life, like, back together, like, readjusting the civilian life?
Well, that was interesting. Of course, I had to get a job. I had to find a job. And so I did have a college education, and I had some good credentials here from the military. So I sent out letters to selected corporations. My father was an executive in the milk business, so he suggested things. But as far as housing was concerned, we stayed with Norma. Where Norma was with her parents, and the grandparents lived downstairs. So we stayed there for a couple of months, a few months. And there was, I don't know if you know what the GI Bill was, but the GI Bill helped veterans get low interest rate mortgages. And so I used that, and we found a house in Elmwood Park, a little brick bungalow. Elmwood Park was a town of many, many, many brick bungalows. And so we bought one of those brick bungalows, and with the GI Bill, we had having served overseas, I had when I was discharged, I had a piece of money, I think $3,000. And so that was enough to buy a house. But house was $11,500. So with $3,000, no problem. So that was the first start, and then shortly got a job with International Harvester Company in Melrose Park, which was near Elmwood Park. And so with that, we were happy to be home and together, living our lives in a normal way.
How did you then go about establishing a career then? You're on a real estate business.
Well,
right?
I was with the International Harvester Company for 12 years. And I had a decent job, a management job, and I thought I could do better than I was doing. With a company, a big company like that, which has operations all over the country, if you have an opportunity to move and they offer you a job in a different town, if you don't accept it, you might get another offer, or maybe not. If you turn them down twice, you wouldn't be able to get another offer. So it looked like if I didn't want to move my family and move to a different area than Chicago, or the Chicago area, that I had kind of a ceiling on how far I could go. Now, I don't know whether that was right or wrong, but nevertheless, I looked in the Wall Street Journal and became hooked up with a metalworking company, a small metalworking company, very small actually. I was with them for a few years when the opportunity came for us to open a real estate office here. And the opportunity to grow with that other company, well, it was ultimately bought by a larger company, and there might have been some good opportunities, but nothing like what happened in real estate. Norma and her brother and I started one office, one salesperson, Norma, and two of us as partners. And I kept my job for a little bit so that we didn't have two salaries to try to pay. But then as we opened a second office, and a third and a fourth and so forth, then of course her brother and I were both running offices, and Norma was the best recruiter we ever had. She had brought people into the business, and she was very good in sales, and so that's how we had 4 children, and when we started the business, we had the 4 children, and she was a mother to 4. And it was a hard thing for her because they were in grade school, and I guess high school, a couple of them in high school. But we got a lot of help from her mother and her dad, who lived here in Glenview.
Did you, when you originally returned to the States, were you treated well by other civilians? Were you welcomed back well?
Oh yes. In World War II, everybody was in the war. Everybody was contributing in some way. And as you know, there was rationing, so you couldn't buy all the meat you wanted, you couldn't buy the gasoline, you couldn't buy tires. I mean, everything was rationed that might be needed for the war effort. And a lot of women worked in factories and in hospitals, and but yeah, there was 100% support for the war and for all of us who served in it. I didn't continue in the military. I had a reserve commission, and I had the opportunity to serve on active duty every summer. Go to some base and work to advance myself. And I, one time, was given the opportunity to go to what was called the Command and General Staff School in Leavenworth, Kansas. At the same time, International Harvester Company offered me the opportunity to go to the University of Chicago and get a master's degree in business. Well, having 4 children, I didn't have any aspirations for continuing as a military man and being moved from who knows where to where, serve every year somewhere and maybe overseas. And, so I declined that, and so in 1953, I think my reserve status reverted to inactive. So I never did do anything further in the military, except reunions.
Right. So you joined a veterans organization then?
Yes, 2 of them. I belong to the American Legion and to the Veterans of Foreign Wars.
How often do you guys meet?
Well, they meet once a month, first Tuesday over here on Milwaukee Avenue.
Where do you go? Where is it? What do you guys, like, what do you do when you're there?
Well, you have a little social hour, and then you are fed a meal. It's their standard meal, and then you have a speaker usually, and then you get a report on upcoming events like the parade on the 4th of July, and now of course there'll be a service at the memorial statue here at Church Street and Glenview Road, so we'll all be there. And there is a concert being given at Glenbrook South High School where the Air Force band is coming in for a couple of days, and they're going to work with the teachers and music students, the band students, and then they'll give a concert in the afternoon, and then there's one in the evening, which we, the Legionnaires, will be seated together. There'll be a color guard to present the colors. So there's not a lot of activity, but we try to, when there's an event like Veterans Day or 4th of July or something with a presentation at the new memorial over at the Glen.
Okay. Did you make any close friendships while you were in service? Not that continued afterward, unfortunately. The fact, no, I didn't actually. They're dispersed all over the country. Right.
And actually, the friends that I had at school at Illinois also went their ways because they're of the war. Many of them went into the military, and of course they came from all over the state and all over the country. And then after the war, I mean, there was that lapse of time after graduation and after the war, by that time many of them were married, like I would, and had their own families, and so we didn't track down our classmates.
Okay. How did your being in the service affect, like, basically affect your life? What's the biggest thing that affected your life?
Well, I think I learned a lot. I think that the service that I had as an adjutant helped me as a business administration person, running businesses and hiring people and dealing with people, and yeah, I think that was helpful in my learning to be a businessman, a business executive. Of course, dealing with people anytime is important. You better learn how to deal with people. It's more important than whatever product it is you want to sell or build. And it was especially true in our real estate business. I would say that the relationship with people was most important.
Do you have anything you'd like to add that we didn't cover?
I think you did a fine job. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.